Hi, this is April with the For Richer or Horror podcast. Welcome. So this week we're going to be talking about a topic that I find utterly fascinating. I kind of find it funny that in my previous episode I had said, we're talking about true crime and conspiracy theories, horror stories, cults, and all this. Not today, but it is something that is really fascinating, and I hope you guys will enjoy the topic as well. So let me kind of set the scene, and see if you guys can figure out what I'm going to be talking about. So, it is April 26th, 1984. You look at the city skyline, a city that is 2.5 kilometers away, or for those of us on the imperial system, 1.55 miles away. You see a bunch of apartments, you see a Ferris wheel, you see the city of Pripyat. Do you know what I'm talking about? Well, if you answered Chernobyl, then you are correct. So, this week we're going to talk about Chernobyl. I find the topic utterly fascinating. I hope you guys do as well. Mostly because I had to learn about it myself. We, of course, talked about it in school, high school history, talk about the explosion of reactor number 4. And it was kind of left at that. There might have been some statistics. I took the damn class and I can't say the word. Some statistics of what happened, how many people died, how many people are impacted by it, all of that. But, it didn't really get into the nitty gritty of what happened. I don't know why it happened. I don't know the lasting effects of it. So I did the research for you, because if you're just basing it off of documentaries that have come out lately, unless you are a nuclear scientist, you may not have understood it. Same as me. But let's get into it. So the explosion of reactor number 4 is considered the biggest technological disaster in history. It affected surrounding nations. It wasn't contained to the USSR, which was still a thing at the time. A lot of people were under the impression that Chernobyl was in Russia. I think there's just a deep connection between Russia and the USSR. It actually happened in the nation of Ukraine. I was under the impression that it was in Russia. I'm assuming a lot of you are as well. I was always fascinated by a bunch of Russian things. I read a bunch of books about it. I watched Life of Boris because I need my dose of Russian lifestyle or whatever. But it happened in USSR, today Ukraine. So the radioactive waste actually spread over half of Europe, and it threatened the lives of millions. Unfortunately, it did actually take a decent percentage of those lives, unfortunately, but we'll get to those sad details later. So let's explore some details now. So the big question, what actually happened? The simple answer is the accident happened as a result of a flawed reactor due to its design that was operated by inadequately trained personnel. So the resulting steam explosion and fires released at least 5% of the radioactive reactor core into the environment, with the deposition of radioactive material in many parts of Europe. So 2 Chernobyl plant workers died due to the explosion on the night of the accident, and a further 28 people died within a few weeks as a result of acute radiation syndrome. So reactor number 4 was an Rbmk reactor. It went out of control during a test at low power, leading to an explosion and fire that demolished the reactor building and released large amounts of radiation into the atmosphere. Okay, I felt like I need to clear my throat. So, safety measures were ignored, the uranium fuel in the reactor overheated and melted through. Oh, my computer just turned off. That's delightful. It melted through the protective barriers. So the RBMK reactors do not have what is known as a containment structure, like a concrete and steel dome over the reactor itself, designed to keep radiation inside the plant in the event of such an accident. So consequently, radioactive elements, including plutonium, iodine, strontium, I'm pronouncing that wrong, I know, and cesium, were scattered over a wide area. In addition, the graphite blocks used as a moderating material in the RBMK caught fire at high temperature as air entered the reactor core, which contributed to emission of radioactive materials into the environment. So, what is RBMK? The translation from Russian or Ukrainian, whichever language, it pretty much just means high power channel type reactor. We don't actually have the acronym RBMK spelled out because it's in a different language. So in the simplest terms, the reactor is a giant tank full of atoms, the building block that makes up everything we see. I'm not a big science person, so I try to dumb it down as much as I can so even I could understand it. I am not good with science, but I hope this all makes sense. So they are themselves composed of 3 particles: protons, neutrons, and electrons. So we're kind of at basic elementary science right now, so I'm able to understand that. But in a reactor, the neutrons collide with the atoms, and splitting them apart, generating heat in a process known as nuclear fission. So that heat helps generate steam, and the steam is used to spin a turbine, which in turn drives a generator to create electricity in much the same way burning coal might. So the core is a large chunk of graphite, and that is where the fission reaction takes place. It has thousands of channels which contain fuel rods, and those are composed of uranium, which has atoms easy to split. The core also has channels for control rods composed of boron and tipped with graphite, and that's designed to neutralize the reaction. So water flows through the fuel rod channels, and the entire structure is encased in steel and sand. So the water is critical to understanding what happened at Chernobyl. In an RBMK reactor, water has 2 jobs. 1, keeping things cool, and 2, slow the reaction down. So this design is not implemented in the same way any other nuclear reactor is in the world. It's completely unique, completely flawed design. So the safety test is the starting point of a chain of errors which ultimately resulted in reactor number 4's explosion. So the facts are, in the event of a blackout or loss of power to the plant, the RBMK reactor will stop pumping water through the core. A backup set of diesel fuel generators kick in after 60 seconds in such an instance, but this time frame risks putting the reactor in danger. Thus, the tests were hoping to show how an RBMK reactor could bridge the 60 seconds and keep pumping cool water in the system by using spare power generated as the plant's turbines slowed down. The test was originally scheduled for April 25th, but was delayed for 10 hours by power grid officials in Kiev, capital of Ukraine. So the delay meant a team of night shift staff would have to run the test, something that they had never been trained to do. So in order to perform the test, the reactor had to be put in dangerously low power state. And if you think about it, it's kind of already been in that condition due to the power grid. So the low power state in the RBMK reactor it's not like putting your computer in sleep mode. It can't be returned to its usual power state quickly. However, the team in the control room at Chernobyl attempted to do just that, and disregarded the safety protocols in place. So, to attempt to get the power back up to an acceptable level, the workers removed the control rods in the core, hoping to kickstart the reaction again and move the power back up. But they couldn't do it. During the 10-hour delay, the core's low power state caused a buildup of xenon, another type of atom that is, in essence, blocks the nuclear fission process. So the core temperature also dropped so much it stopped boiling water away and producing steam. The usual course of action with such low power would be to bring the core's power level back up over 24 hours. The power plant chief, Dyatlov, did not want to wait, and so he forged ahead and went with the safety test. So if we want to recall how the water both cools the core and slows the reaction down, when the water turns into steam, it lacks the ability to effectively do both of these things. Basically, it just boils away, becomes bubbles or voids. I have voids in quotation marks right now. I'll explain in a minute. So in the Rbmk reactor, it's the opposite. More steam results in higher reactivity. So this positive void coefficient is unique to the Russian Rbmk reactor. So once the plant workers shut down the reactor at 1:23 a.m., water is no longer pumped into the core. The catastrophic cascade at Chernobyl is set into motion. So the safety test shuts down the reactor and the remaining water boils away. So thus more steam, more bubbles, more of the void. So the steam makes the nuclear fission more efficient, speeding it up, thus more heat. So it's just more heat boiling the water away faster, more steam, more steam, more steam. You get the point. So the core is quickly generating steam and heat in a runaway reaction. All but 6 of the 211 plus control rods have been removed from the core, and the water is no longer providing any cooling effects. So the core is now just a giant kid's ball pit in an earthquake with neutrons bouncing around the chamber and constantly colliding with one another. The only thing the workers could do was hit the emergency stop button. So that brings us into the actual explosion. Again, at 1:23, 36 seconds later, the emergency stop button was pressed by Chief of the night shift. This forces all of the control rods back into the core. So the control rods should decrease the reaction because they are tipped with graphite, they actually cause the power to spike even more. So over the next 5 seconds, the power increases dramatically to levels that the reactor cannot withstand. So the caps on the top of the reactor core, weighing more than 750 pounds, begin to literally bounce in the reactor hull. All right, so now we're up to 1:23 and 45 seconds. The explosion occurs 5 seconds after the emergency stop button was pressed. So it's a pretty immediate reaction. So it's not a nuclear explosion, but a steam explosion. I kept saying steam over and over and over again. Here it is again. It's a steam explosion caused by the huge buildup of pressure within the core. That blows the biological shield off the top of the core and ruptures the fuel channels and causes graphite to be blown into the air. As a result, another chemical reaction takes place. Air slips into the reactor hull and ignites, causing a second explosion that terminates the nuclear reactions in the core and leaves a mighty hole in the Chernobyl reactor building. So the first 2 firefighter units that reported to the reactor all died due to horrible burns at this point. I mean, reactor number 3, it's burning as well at this point. And hospitals and care units were so full from burn victims that patients were just laying on the floor. They weren't able to hold that many people. They weren't expecting anything like this to happen. So residents of Pripyat were evacuated, not even immediately, which is the weird part. No one really knew the consequences of the reactor blowing up, and residents were told to pack a bag for 4 days. Only bring the necessities, and after 4 days you'll be able to return. Yeah, that's not true. They never returned. Because it's kind of uninhabitable for the next 20,000 years. So the USSR government covered the story for like 3 or 4 days. They didn't want to tell anyone. They didn't want to admit their mess up, and they only admitted it because the radiation had reached Sweden. So fucking far away. So it started covering half of Europe. So the USSR government, that is, refused to provide information. Because, this was the height of the Cold War. They didn't want to say shit about their fuck up. Citizens only got info from rumors prior to the evacuation. And it was, rumors were going around. There's an explosion or a fire. Some people went to Pripyat. They checked out the scene. It wasn't until they realized the severity, seeing Pripyat, where there were planes, helicopters, emergency vehicles, military units surrounding the plant. No one knew what happened. So this gets into some very tragic details about victims. Let's talk about babies. So babies born during this time were stillborn. Some deliveries were early from the stress of the events, but within a few hours of the explosions, babies were contaminated, and when the pregnant women went into labor, they gave birth to babies with heart, eye, and limb defects suffering from radiation exposure. That was just a few hours after the explosion. They went into preterm labor, and they already had radiation exposure. So everyone in the surrounding area was exposed to radiation, obviously. People developed cancer over time. Someone had a stroke from blood vessel damage. But 50 deaths can be attributed just to the explosion. But the Union of Concerned Science estimated between 4,000 and 27,000 deaths are attributed to the radiation exposure and resulting conditions. Whereas Green Peach, it's another union, another reporting agency, say it's more like 93,000 to 200,000. Which is unbelievable. At the highest number, that's a fifth of a million. Sorry, my audio just completely cut off right there and deleted everything that I had previously recorded, so I'm coming in and redoing that. So yeah, that's a fifth of a million people by Green Peach's reportings. So we're going to change gears a little bit here. We are going to discuss more current events going on in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, the things that we're kind of seeing in the news today. So the workers eventually bulldozed and buried radioactive trees in the area. So squads of Soviet conscripts came out, and they were ordered to, unfortunately, shoot any stray animals within the 1,000 square mile Chernobyl exclusion zone. So that's extremely unfortunate, but they didn't want any contamination to go outside of the exclusion zone. And let's talk about that exclusion zone. That's 1,000 square miles. That is unbelievable. That area is uninhabitable for 20,000 years. It's unsafe for humans. However, numerous animals and plant species have not only survived, but they've honestly thrived in these conditions, having people out of there pretty much. So, brown bears, wolves, lynxes, bison, deer, moose, beavers, foxes, badgers, wild boar, raccoons, and dogs, as well as more than 200 species of birds, have formed their own ecosystem within the Chernobyl disaster area. So today's wild animals, they're not exactly sporting extra limbs. They're not glowing. There's not cows roaming around that have a third head, There is partial albinism found in certain bird species, but there aren't the genetic abnormalities that we expect. Like if anyone has watched the Simpsons movie, EPA, but we're not seeing those effects. Deer don't have fins. They don't have anything like that. But there is genetic changes that have happened within their DNA on account of the exposure. Just not outward. We don't see it. So, the Chernobyl caused genetic mutations in plants and animals have increased by a factor of 20. These increased mutation affect species reproductive rates, their population size, their genetic diversity, and other survival factors. So that's how they've been impacted by the mutations, which honestly is kind of a good thing. It's making them better. It's making them withstand radiation, and they're somewhat immune. But it's doing good things for them. So wolves were found to be 7 times more abundant on the premises than in other non-radioactive areas. This can also be said for moose, roe deer, red deer, and wild boar. So something that I had seen in the news was Chernobyl horses. The technical name is Przewalski's horse. They are an endangered wild species that originated in Mongolia, and they are now thriving within the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. In the late 1990s, there were about 30 Przewalski horses left in existence, from our understanding. They were released in the Ukrainian side of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Why? They decided, hey, this is a radioactive area, let's drop the last of these horses here, so see if they survive. I don't know whose idea that was. It turned out to be a great idea, though, because it worked. And there are now 150 Przewalski's horses living in the Ukrainian part of the exclusion zone. So their numbers have tripled in the last, well, it said late 90s, so like, I don't know, 25 years or so. I didn't get an exact number. Oops. So in contrast to the larger species and fauna in the area, bugs and spiders are not doing nearly as great. Their numbers have dropped. They're dying, or most of them are already dead. So that kind of explains what's currently going on in the area. Humans can't be there for 20,000 years, but what is it, flora and fauna? No, what is it? The, animals and plants, they're doing great. But we can't live there. I know there's tours out there. I've always wanted to do that. That sounds absolutely incredible to go out and see one day. But anywho, so I kind of wanted to end this on a more positive note. So, recent developments. Up until 2018, it was illegal to bring any animal out of the zone due to risk of radiation contamination. But now, puppies are cleared of radiation, are getting a chance to find their forever homes. So you can get yourself a Chernobyl puppy. I wonder what you'd name it. Would you name it like Pripyat? What? I mean, hey, reactor number 4, come here. That'd be funny. Tragic, but funny. So yeah, I wanted to end that on a positive note. Go get yourself a Chernobyl puppy. I bet they are incredibly adorable. They will not have a second tail. They will not have a third eye. That they'll have mutation inside of them. But yeah, so that concludes our talk on the Chernobyl disaster. I hope you all found it interesting. I hope I did the research justice. I hope you're able to understand all the scientific terms, because that was something hard for me to wrap my head around. But yeah, we're going to leave it off there. I hope you guys subscribe and follow. Want to hear some future episodes that come out. They may include an area, a superstitious area in Arizona, because hey, I live here. Alrighty, well, that wraps it up. Thank you guys for listening, and bye.